Hello, welcome today. My name is Jamie. I'm one of the addictions counselors with the Ottawa Catholic School Board, and I'm here with Monique. Monique, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Monique Gaudreault, and I'm also an addictions counselor with the Ottawa Catholic School Board, and I service the schools of St. Matthew, St. Peter's, and Immaculata High School.
And I service the schools of Lester B. Pearson, St. Paul's, and St. Joseph. Today, we're here to talk to you a little bit about screen time and the pandemic or COVID that we're going through. And this really is a presentation that's targeted for parents. Um, and so we'll get started on that. So, just to start, we have a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are located on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded Indigenous territory of the Algonquin peoples, on whose territory we pray, learn, play, and work. So the objectives for the presentation today is to kind of explain what screen time is and what screen time has kind of looked like during the pandemic. We want to talk about the protective power of connection, different types of screen time, and the comforting power of predictability for our students. The majority of the focus of the presentation today really is talking about how to make sure that the youth's screen time is beneficial or problematic. So we're really focused here in on prevention and developing healthy habits, healthy screen time habits. We will talk near the end of the presentation about how to recognize when those behaviors get problematic or they move into the sub or screen use disorder, and how to recognize that and then what to do about that. Um, So we're trying to get back to the basic pillars of health. In order to build healthy screen time habits, we want that screen time to really build on our nutrition, build on our sleep, build on our exercise, and build on our social connection.
Okay, so now we wanted to talk to you guys about COVID-19 and how it has affected our screen time. So a recent Stats Canada survey showed that 64% of parents are really concerned about how much time that their kids are spending on screens. And 71% of parents were concerned about their kids' connection with their peers. And so the reality really is that we are now doing so much more from home. We're working, we're going to school, we're doing just about everything from home, and a lot of it is online. So we thought that it would be a good reflection for you guys as we begin this presentation to just give a thought to how has COVID affected the way that your family uses screens. I'll give you just a second or two to consider that, and then we'll move on. And then we also wanted to bring about the idea that not all screen time is created equal. So in the last few years, screen time has gotten a bit of a bad rap. Screen time, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. But there is screen time that is more positive and screen time that is less positive. And so we figured that it would make sense in the context of a pandemic to look at our kids are going to be on screens more. How do we help them do things on screens that are more positive versus less positive? So we're going to break down for you what that looks like. So what is less positive, positive, and most positive screen time? Less positive screen time. So actually just before that, I'll get into explain a little bit the idea of family values. So if your family is a family that, let's say, highly values peaceful interactions, being kind to one another, something that would maybe go against that family value is the first person shooter games that are full of violence and full of aggression. And so we consider you guys, or invite you guys just to consider a little bit what your kid is consuming online and how that lines up with the family values that you guys have. And so on this continuum of less positive, positive, most positive screen time, less positive screen time goes against those family values. It encourages really passive, the person's just sitting back, not doing much of anything, and encourages disconnection from reality and doesn't have any educational content. So that's things like the first-person shooter games and just mindlessly scrolling through social media. More positive screen time is something that's more in line with the family connections and builds on our in real life connections. So with the friends that we have at school, or maybe the friends that your kids have through an extracurricular, or something that has a bit of an added health or educational benefit, like something that's getting your kid up and walking, like Dance Revolution or Pokemon Go, when they are using a screen, but they're out walking and doing things. Also, just a small side note, I attended a really cool training the other day that made a really big distinction between kids using technology to connect with their friends, so via texting or sharing videos and that kind of thing, and social media. And so there's this idea that social media is people connecting socially. But a lot of the time, social media is that mindless scrolling through media. And so, really encouraging parents to make the distinction between um, the screen use that's helping them connect with their friends and that social media that isn't necessarily connection and is more just kind of that mindless scrolling, comparing that happens. And then that brings us to the most positive screen time. So that's something that's really in line with your family values, that has an educational benefit and that can contribute to their health and their wellness. And so that's things like the mindfulness apps or apps to help somebody sleep, their online school, obviously, if they're required to do that, maybe learning how to play an instrument or video calls with family. So, a virtual Thanksgiving dinner, that kind of thing. And sorry, oh, I went one, two more. And we also want to talk about helping our kids develop skills. So it's not necessarily just about controlling and limiting their screen time, but also helping them develop some of those kind of real life skill management skills. And that's things like time management, like emotional regulation, priorities management, knowing, when to stop one task to start another, and that kind of thing. Um, And we also wanted to note that it's really important that this context that we're living in right now, no, we haven't lived through this. There's no handbook for living through a pandemic, and being kind to yourself and recognizing that these are difficult times and that some days are going to be really great and some days are going to be not so much. And that your health and your well-being as a parent is a really strong indicator of how your kids are going to be doing. So it is really important to take care of ourselves and to take a break and to be able to relax.
Hi, so we're going to move on to social connection. Social connection is extremely important at any time when there's high stress or there's a lot of change or there's a lot of new things happening. And I think, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknown, a lot of stress. And so social connection during stressful times with so much change is really important. It's really important to connect with family and friends at this time. And some of the research or some of the webinars that we've been attending have really highlighted this and really stressed that, it's that parent-child connection that is the key, most important factor when it comes to protecting against the risks and the harms of too much screen use. So when we're talking about fostering social connections, we want to build up those positive connections. We want to be building purposeful and positive connections with adults and peers to support our children in developing in a positive way throughout that pandemic. So typically, at other times when we're not being asked to socially distance, or socially isolate, our kids have a number of different interactions with other people throughout the day. So they go to school, they have an interaction with a teacher, they might have an interaction with a custodian, they have various interactions with their different peers and their friends. And so they're always building up these interactions and these connections throughout the day. During the pandemic, these connections have either had to be rethought in terms of how they're going to build these connections, or we've really had to limit who our kids or who the students are connecting with throughout the day. And so a lot more technology has been used to facilitate those connections. So kids are connecting via social media, they're connecting through text, they're connecting through Fortnite or Roblox or different video games where they're able to have those interactions. So because the way that we're connecting is changing and moving more towards that technology, the importance of talking to your youth and building those in real life connections with them has increased. So, part of those conversations is really to monitor who your youth are talking to, who they connect with, how often they're connecting. Are they friends? Are they connecting with people who they know in real life that go to their school or on their sports teams or family members? Or are they meeting people online who they've never met that might be playing from a different part of the world? So you really want to be kind of having these conversations and showing interest in to your youth's experience online. We also want to be modeling some healthy habits. So, especially in the time of COVID and the pandemic, we are, as parents, modeling those healthy habits more frequently than we ever have before. So our kids are looking to us to see what we're doing, how we're using screen time, and then making sense of that and relating that to their experience. So, parents need to have screen-free break times as well. If you want your kids to have a balanced approach to screen time, then you need to show them what you're doing. I was talking to a parent last week, actually, who was a good example of this, and she was talking to her kid about how, once she has done everything that needs to get done, she's done her work on the computer, um, or off the computer, she's, done some chores, she's done everything that needs to do, then she's able to use some screen time that's more for entertainment. And so she was able to have that open conversation and kind of model how you want to be using screen time in your life. The more we communicate, so we want to communicate and be together. So, again, we want to talk to youth about their online and their offline lives. What do they like about their video games? What is it about Minecraft? What are they building? How are things going in Fortnite? And, if we can, we want to participate with them, but still having conversations about, why do they like this video game? What did they get out of that? Um, it's not just it's not enough to just sit and to play the video games with them, but really have to move beyond that to have conversations about the video games, or their social media or their TikTok videos, and really try to talk about and link that back to how it's helpful or harmful for them. And then it's important to also plan some time outdoors with various activities so that you have a bit of that balance. The good news is that Health Canada, Stats Canada did a report, and so it showed that even though we're consuming more technology, we're using the internet more, we're on screens more, we're also doing this. We're getting outside to exercise more, and we're exercising more indoors as well. So that balance is coming, so that was some good news. Um, there are some risks. So if we are disconnecting or not really focused on that connection at home, and your youth are not supervised on their screens, then there are some risks. There's risks that your children could be exploited, that they might have early exposure to mature content, and they might be exposed to cyberbullying, and so people could be bullying them on those social media sites. Often, the students who I've been working with, for various reasons, actually, screen time comes up no matter the reason why they are referred to me. They've been telling me about situations where they have been reached out to by people who they don't know and asked for inappropriate photos. And, a lot of the times the students have been able to reach out to their parents, but you want to make sure that the kids feel comfortable to do that and to be able to do that. We have a short video clip of Katie McPherson talking about the importance of kind of knowing screen time's role within the pandemic. It's an American news clip. However, I do feel that it is important and relevant to the Canadian context as well.
Well, so much of our time is spent in front of screens these days for work, to connect with others, for fun. Our children have increased screen time as well.
And tonight, our Sandra Ali shows us one expert recommends we consider to make sure it's not too much.
Screen time for our kids looks completely different during the pandemic. Many are using tablets and computers for online or remote learning, but they also want to use it for fun. Managing all that digital time can be difficult without a plan.
Schoolwork, virtually visiting family and friends, TV movies, and video games. The coronavirus pandemic might mean more screen time than ever for us and our children.
I definitely think that we need to give kids grace, especially as they're online doing remote learning.
Katie McPherson is an educator who teaches digital do's and don'ts to parents and kids. She says think of online learning as your child's daily dose of digital vegetables. Everything else is digital candy, so to speak.
Any sort of game that you would deem that has no redeeming quality of their life, really. I'm talking about the Snapchat, the Twitter, the TikTok, the Instagram, those things that are kind of just mindless.
McPherson says have good parental controls in place.
Meaning, do you have a good router? Do you have like a little sort of family data plan contract where you set some reasonable boundaries and limits?
Recommended screen time for children 5 and older is 2 hours a day, including TV time. So should you consider letting your child have more time?
I would start at 2 hours as your baseline limit and try to see how that works for you.
And work with your child to come up with a plan.
Sitting down as a family and just saying, for the next 90 days, we're not sure what this is going to look like. What do you think is fair? Here's what mom and dad think, and kind of work with your kids depending on age on that.
And use technology to help your children connect to family and friends.
Social distancing should not mean social disengagement. Our children and ourselves need face-to-face time. There's some really great apps out there that I would suggest. GroupMe, House Party, when supervised, can be a decent app. Zoom, obviously, when supervised, can be a decent app. FaceTime is great, but again, with supervision. I wouldn't be allowing phones behind bathroom doors or bedroom doors.
McPherson says if your child already struggles with screen time, don't lift limits. And with extra gaming, remember, some video games can be addictive.
Although they are communicating, you still want bodies moving, you still want physical touch happening in the home, lots of hugs and connection with mom and dad as well.
And remember, whatever you give in additional screen time, McPherson says, you will then have to wean them off of it eventually. She says, take that slow. I'm Sandra.
Okay, so we just wanted to show that. We thought that it spoke a lot to that idea of looking for quality screen time, worrying maybe a little bit less about the quantity, and just really keeping an eye on what it is our kids are doing, and how can we help that be something that contributes to their overall health. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how to talk to your kids about this stuff. So it's hard, right? It's often a point of contention. It's often something that families are fighting about, constantly asking people to put devices away, and kids, getting angry and not liking the limits. And so we thought that it would make sense to talk a little bit about how to have those conversations. So where are you doing it? How are you doing it? All of those different kinds of questions, making sure that the conversation doesn't come up in the middle of an argument. Setting a specific time aside to have a conversation, knowing that it's an important conversation and that it might end up fairly emotionally charged, and not just kind of doing it on a whim, but doing it with a bit of a plan, and approaching it with a clear mindset. Um, and then also, like Jamie had talked about a little bit earlier, is communicate, ask questions about what they're doing. Why is it that they like Minecraft? Who do they follow on Instagram, and why? Is it doing something positive for them to be, watching somebody who's, let's say, doing all kinds of great work, helping communities in need, or are they following people who, when they spend a lot of time on their Instagram feed, it ends up giving them, feelings around like body image that harms them and that kind of thing. So just asking a lot of questions about what they're up to. Why do you like this particular thing? What is it about this app? Let's look at your Pinterest board and see what's on there, and what kind of stuff that you're into. Um, yeah. So talking about these conversations, really trying to make sure that the tone is open, that you're trying, that they can feel that you're trying to understand, that it doesn't feel like you're coming down with, this is what needs to happen and this is how it's going to happen, but really trying to get a sense of I want to understand, I want to get it. And that starts with you. So if you know for yourself that you're not necessarily in a great headspace, it's probably not the right time to start that conversation. um, and when our kids do things sometimes that we don't love, it can make us feel things about ourselves and about our own parenting. And so if fighting with your kid about the screen often makes you feel like, oh, I don't have a handle on this and what am I doing wrong, then it's important to know those things for yourself so that you can come into it with as clear of a mind as you can and an open mind. Practicing non-judgmental communication. So that's things like I think, I feel, I need, using I statements rather than you statements. You're doing this, you're doing that, but I feel like, it's gotten a little out of hand. Um, I've noticed that when you've used your screen for a long time, uh, your reactions end up kind of quick and snippy, and it's not hard for me to say something that you react strongly to. So really trying to help them understand what you're seeing as an impact to the person themselves, to your kid themselves, or to the family environment. And then trying to focus on understanding what's happening. Again, the same idea, instead of controlling, and educating how screen time can impact kids, rather than just setting hard consequences. Um, and keeping in mind that these conversations are hard. Any hard conversation, even between two adults, is tricky, right? So making sure you're picking a location, so maybe not ambushing them in their room, but picking a location that's neutral ground. Kids often do really well in the car because it takes the pressure of, sitting down with eye contact. So keeping that in mind, maybe planning that a little bit ahead of time. Keeping an eye on your own body language. So recognizing that if you're seeing your kid all tensed up like this, your kid's going to read that off of you, and they're gonna sense that, mom or dad is tense already coming to this. So trying to keep yourself relaxed and open, and just trying to go with the flow of what's gonna happen, and check in with yourself and recognize, uh, am I getting upset? Am I getting worked up? Is my tone increasing? Is my energy increasing? And if so, sometimes it's just a much better idea to take a little break from the conversation, whether that's, stopping to take a couple of deep breaths, or whether that's actually saying, I think this has maybe gotten out of hand a little bit. Maybe we should take a little break and we'll come back and we'll talk about this again sometime soon. Um, and then trying to keep your questions open versus closed. And that's really hard to do. But an example of an open question is, what do you like about Minecraft? And a closed question is, did you play Minecraft today? So a closed question elicits only a yes or no answer. So trying really hard, and it's tricky to keep your questions open. How was your day? That kind of thing.
So, Mo, can I give you an example of a really positive conversation that a parent had with their kid? Would that be
Go for
helpful?
it. Absolutely.
So I was talking to a parent again last week about screen time and an incident that happened. And so her young kid, who's in middle school, so he's not that young, but he was playing Fortnite with his friends online, and he had used some language that really is not consistent with the language that's okay for them to use in their house. And so I think he had been swearing, and then his mom had told him, it's time to come upstairs, like, let's turn this off. And so she could have reacted with a lot of anger. She could have kind of stood at the top of the stairs waiting for him to come up. But what she did actually was invite him to have a snack. So let's sit down at the kitchen, and they're fortunate. They had like a little kitchen island where they normally stand around to have a snack. And can we have a snack? And she said, can I talk to you about what I heard on Fortnite? I know Fortnite's really important to you. I know that you use it as a way to connect with your friends. But let's just talk about like what was going on and why I heard that language. And so she was able to open up that conversation, and her son was able to say, yeah, you know what, Mom, sometimes I get carried away. I get really worked up in there. My other friends were using that language, and, I'll try to do better as we go forward. And so she chose to take a really curious stance. She was open, they were standing, it was neutral ground. She was, asking him about that using a calm tone. And so that allowed them to kind of process that together. She didn't overreact. She didn't set any limits about it. She didn't kind of jump in there and say, hey, you can't play Fortnite now because I heard this language. She was more kind of open and curious about it, which I think is important because we want the kids to come to us when there's an issue. So we want to really be open. And I just really liked how that parent managed that and thought that that was a good example to share. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. I think that was a really great example. And it actually makes me think of something, and I think I might have missed it on a previous slide. And I want to get the language right, so I'm going to look for it. So, that idea of being open and making sure that our kids can come talk to us. And so, I think anybody who uses the internet enough knows that there's some dicey stuff on the internet. And our kids are going to encounter it. The more that they know that mom or dad is open and curious, they want to know, they ask questions, and they don't overreact over the top. The more so this researcher had done some research and come up with this idea, and I like the word. So if kids think that their parents are scary, crazy, or clueless, they're much less likely to talk to them about some of those questionable things they come across on the internet. So if they think that, like my parent has, they have no clue, they just don't understand anything about any of this, then they're not likely to go and approach them with it. If they think that their parent is going to overreact and blow the top and get rid of all the devices in the house and say that's it, you're done on the internet forever, then they're also not likely to talk. And so or if they feel like they're going to get in some major trouble, right? Why did you do this? Why would you go on these sites? Then again, they're a lot less likely to open up and share with their parents what's going on. And if our kids are encountering things that are dangerous or scary on the internet, we want them to talk to us about it because it's the way that we can help keep them safe. So thanks, Jamie. That's awesome. And we also wanted to talk a little bit about, obviously, this pandemic is new. It's new for everybody, and so much has changed, and things change almost on the daily, right? And so it's important to take care of yourself, and it's important to validate that this is weird, and 1 week we can do this, and the next week we can't do that, and trying to really practice some healthy coping mechanisms, and remembering again that our kids are watching us, and they're taking our lead on a lot of things. And so the best things that we can do for them is to reassure them that you are there and that they can count on you. Help create some structured routine for them and making sure that there are things that they can count on every day. And even if that's something as simple as making sure we all sit down to have supper together, or every evening we go for a walk together and we walk the dog. Something that they know that they can count on through their day is really important. And then that regulation piece, and this is what I was talking about at the very beginning, is helping our kids develop some of those self-regulation tools so that when they are stressed, when they are angry, that their knee-jerk reaction isn't just to grab their phone and zone out, but that they're actually learning things like breathing, things like, changing spaces so that you can change your headspace, and all these different types of awesome tools we have, but that require a little bit of intention to, take a step away, take a few breaths, that kind of thing. So we have pretty important roles for these kiddos right now.
Yeah, so we're modeling not just, sorry to interrupt again, but we're
That's okay.
modeling healthy, like self-care, right? It's okay to not know. It's okay to feel anxiety. It's okay to be upset right now because the world, we just don't know, right? And things are changing. And so we're modeling for our kids that it's okay to not know, right? And it's okay to need a bubble bath or a hot chocolate sometimes, because that's how you want to take care of yourself and re-energize.
And it's okay to feel frustrated with all the stuff that's happening right now, right? It's nobody knows what to expect, what's coming from one day to the next to the next. And it is frustrating to have, limits, and to have things that we used to love to do that we can't. So yeah, it's okay to not be okay. And so I'm going to talk, my next two slides are just around how to limit some of that stuff. So here are some kind of practical things on how to try and set some limits. So the first thing is around clarity. So making sure this isn't a time or a place for surprises. Making sure that you work together. So that second point, control. So the more control your kiddo feels like they have over the limits, the better it will go down for them. So talk with them, work with them, try and figure out what kind of schedule is going to work. When are our screen-free times that everybody's doing together? So we're all going to be together and we're not going to have screens. And when are we going to use our screens? And let's be clear about it. And how long are we going to use our screens for? And there is going to be a clear time for when we put the screens away. And if that doesn't happen, then what's going to happen? What are the consequences going to be? So all of that should be very clear, that this isn't a place for surprises. And the clearer it is and the more consistent it is, the more your kiddo will be able to get in line with it. And again, I feel like we're hammering this point home, but modeling, they're watching you. And if they know that if you're having a really hard time limiting your own screen time, but you're asking them to limit theirs, they might have a really difficult time taking you seriously. And so recognizing that, like, for us as well, for adults, right, it's as uncertain for us as it is for them. And sometimes the temptation to just sit on Facebook and scroll for a long time is there. But recognizing that if we're having these battles in our house with our kids about screen time and stuff like that, that when we, unwind for a half an hour on Facebook, they're noticing and they're watching it. So just keeping that in the back of your head. And also noting that there are a lot of parental control apps. There are lots of tools available to you. And like, don't be shy about using them. So I often will talk with parents who, parents who have teenagers right now, when life was very different when you were a teenager as a parent, right? And so your parents didn't have to manage, when they wanted you off the television, they turned off the television and said, go outside, right? So it's a very different world today, and parents aren't necessarily always sure what their role is in how much do I limit? How much am I supposed to know about all their different accounts and what they're doing and that kind of thing? So it's really a learning curve for a lot of parents, but there are so many tools that are at your disposal, and look them up and use them. And there's lots of different parenting websites that will give a top 5 or a top 10 tools that work the best with different reviews. Use them, and it will help you to increase the success in your family for that. And then we thought it would be important to talk about too, that the transition from the screen time. So you've agreed that from 3 to 4 after school, Johnny can watch his iPad. Cool. So it's very clear. It's not a surprise. Ensuring that you give some warnings. So 10 minutes before the end. So 10 minutes before 4 o'clock, pop your head in. Hey, screen time's ending in 10 minutes. 5 minutes before the end of screen time. Hey, screen time's ending in 5 minutes. So just so that it's not a surprise. And it's actually Jamie who gave me this this analogy. The idea that, let's say you were sitting down and eating a bag of chips, and somebody just walks up and takes the chips out of your hands and says, "That's it, chips are done." That doesn't feel very good, and that's a really similar feeling to what the kiddos are experiencing when a parent walks into the room and says, "All right, give me the iPad, you're done." So really trying to keep empathizing with them that this is something that they enjoy and it's ending, and that can be difficult for them. And again, that idea of giving some control. So let them say, okay, screen time is over. Can you turn the iPad off, please? Letting them do a bunch of that stuff for themselves rather than, literally taking it from their hands can help with that transition so that, they've got some control in it. And then putting the device away somewhere that's not easy to access can take some of that temptation away. And again, involving them in setting the goals for what that looks like. A really important thing too that can really help with that transition is planning something for after. So you're not taking the tablet away, let's say in that same example from Johnny, and just saying, it's up to you, figure out what you're going to do next. So if those transitions are really hard, making a plan to say, we're going to put the tablet away, but then we're going to go walk the dog together. And you know that Johnny likes going to walk the dog, and he gets outside and he gets to run and jump and play and grab sticks and do this kind of stuff. That's really helpful to know what the next thing is going to be, so that your kid's not left wanting for the device that they've just lost. They're able to know what they're transitioning to, and they're able to engage in it. So trying to make sure that it's something that's fun and that they enjoy for that transition. And again, that kind of idea of showing compassion. It's hard. It's hard. I'm an adult, and I know I struggle sometimes with putting my phone away or finishing something. And so recognizing that it's difficult for them and showing some compassion to them.
Yeah, the other thing that I just wanted to add around kind of that transition out is to remember that a lot of the games, especially a lot of the video games like Fortnite and Roblox and Minecraft, and some of the first-person shooter games, like a lot of those kids are connecting with their peers and playing those games together, and they have a role in that game. So they're working as a team, and they're trying to figure things out. And so that transition out of that and away from that is really important to give those timings and to really talk to your kid about the timings for that. Because if not, it's kind of the equivalent of you walking into the school gym where your kid is playing basketball and just kind of like ripping them out of that basketball game, right? It's kind of embarrassing for them, because mom has now told me I have to stop and they weren't able to finish, and now their team is left short a player. So, I know it's a video game, and, sometimes we don't always give them the credit uh, that it is part of their world experience. And so we need to understand that before we just say time's up.
Yeah, and
Sorry.
actually, no, that's okay. It actually makes me think of the training that I took a couple days ago, where one of the presenters was talking about it. I can't remember the name of the game, but that some of the games, if you're on a team and one team member leaves, the whole team dies. And so, like, it's ruined the game for everybody. And so when we think about social dynamics and how that all works on games, if you're the person who's ruining it for everybody else, that might feel pretty terrible too. And so, sometimes kids have really strong reactions to ends, but there might be some reasons behind that. And so again, coming back to that communication. So, what game are you playing? Okay, is this one of those games? All right, so how do we plan this transition so that you can exit at a time where it's not going to hurt anybody else's game? So that was a really good point, Jamie. Thank you.
Yeah, and how much time do you need to make that exit? Like, is it
Yeah,
5 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? Like, what
yeah,
is it?
absolutely. Making that successful, right? If it takes 20 minutes, then all right, you can give them a warning at 20 minutes and say, okay, here's your 20 minutes, start making your exit. So absolutely. But, for a kiddo, knowing that their parent cares about that for them, that's pretty powerful, right? So that communication is so important. Okay.
And it goes to
And
that connection piece that we were talking about before.
yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to move on to talking a little bit about how to recognize and what do we mean by problematic screen use. Before we kind of get into kind of things to look for and what to recognize, I will say that our ABA team did put out a really good video also called Too Much Tech, and it gives some really good concrete strategies of how to build on what we were saying about managing the ending of technology in particular. And so that's on the board website, and it is in the reference section of our presentation at the end. So if you just want to look for that. But then what is problematic screen time? So we hear about screen addiction. It's not actually in the diagnostic statistical manual, but it is. It does have an international disease code from the World Health Organization. So, it's kind of on that continuum. So here's some things to look for and what to talk about. And so, as we said, like by time you're down into that less positive aspect of screen use, then more problems are going to come up. So you're going to kind of look for different areas in your life. People often turn to kind of the sense of escapism through, binge watching, surfing, gaming, and different aspects of it. And that's to try to turn our brains off, right? It's to alleviate depression, to cope with anxiety, and to avoid reality. So, you had a rough day at work, you come home, you notice yourself just scrolling mindlessly through your phone, not really paying attention to what's going on. Or you're watching TV, and then you watched a whole episode of something, but you didn't really kind of pay attention to that. So I'm wondering if the stress of COVID has increased this type of screen use for your family. This isn't an interactive presentation, but it is something that you could reflect on. Are you having more days where you notice that you've watched the breakfast television or you've watched the news in the morning, and then that is kind of triggering some feelings for you and you're escaping onto these more problematic forms of screen use? The other thing that can happen when people are playing video games or they're using their screens is they can enter into this state of flow where you have narrowed attention to kind of what's going on around you, and you're highly focused and highly concentrated on the video game or on what's happening with the screen. And so when you're engaged in that sense of flow, you're not really paying attention to your environment around you, and you can lose track of how much time you spend. And so at the beginning of the presentation, we talked a little bit about how we want your screen use to really build on exercise, build on nutrition, build on social connection, build on learning, and build on your ability to sleep, rather than take away from those things. And so the problematic screen use is when your screen use starts to take away from those things. So some things that you might notice is that when our youth are asked to shut down or cut back on the youth, or when you try to shut down or cut back on your use, you see that there's this restless behavior. You get moody, depressed, and irritable. And it's almost like, I'll put my phone down for now, but then you have like this need to kind of pick it up again. You could be using more technology than you originally scheduled for. So, you realize that in the context of the pandemic, you're going to use more screen time. That's okay. You build a schedule around that, but you start to see that you're leaking outside of that schedule and using screens more than you would like to. It can be problematic when you're lying to your friends or family or trying to hide your use, or you realize that the kids are taking the technology and using it outside of the times when you say that they can. You might be avoiding family or friends so that you can continue to use technology, and you might be using it as escapism or to experience that feeling of flow. Kids or anybody really, video games allow us to create a community or a culture sometimes where we get to represent the world and create a world that is our perfect world, right? We get to see who enters into that world. We have a lot of control over what we look like. You can create avatars. We have a lot of control over the environment that we're in and what we do in that environment. And in the real world, especially with youth, we don't always have that much control, right? And so the kids are liking that fact and enjoying that they have, they might be able to be outgoing, whereas in the real world, they're quite shy and anxious, and they like that. The video games give us that. But then they lose that connection between reality and their online world. So
And just
that's,
add to that, Jamie, with the pandemic, so much of that control is out of our hands right now, right? Our kids, our high school kids, have been put into cohorts based on their last name. And maybe their best friend has a last name that's in the totally other half of the cohort. And now they're at school and they don't really have great connection there. So on their off days, they're probably really seeking that connection that you're talking about and that control over, like, when so many things in their environment is out of their control right now. So I think the pandemic is just heightening that need.
yeah, I agree with that. The other thing when it comes to screen addiction is a lot of the times what you'll notice is that the youth or the kids or the adult has completely disconnected from kind of the real world. So they're playing the video games, they're not talking to people. Oftentimes their sleep wake schedule has completely shifted. So they're staying up at night and sleeping during the day. Their nutrition is really problematic. They're eating snacks in front of the TV rather than having nutritious meals. Um, they connect online, but they're not connecting in real life. And so that's how you know that things are getting pretty serious when it comes to that problematic screen use. All right, Mo, I think you're taking us on
So
to the
what do
next.
we do if it starts to feel like things have gotten out of hand? So the transitions away from screens get really, really messy and really, we're arguing and fighting a lot. Or I hear parents describe it sometimes that they feel like they've lost their kiddo. They don't really recognize them so much anymore. Their kiddo used to like to play soccer and, maybe they were in band, and now the only thing that they're really doing is playing video games or scrolling on Instagram and TikTok all day long. So the Ottawa Catholic School Board has an addiction counselor. So Jamie and I we let you know at the beginning of the schools that we were representing, but there is a version of us in every high school in Ottawa. And we are able to meet with any students between grade 7 and 12 for support one-on-one. In non-COVID times, we were able to do groups and stuff like that, but we'll figure it all out at some point in time. But we are here to support. And so it's also important to note that even if your kiddo is not necessarily interested in meeting with one of us, we can also act as a bit of a consultant for parents and talk with parents and maybe build a bit of a plan. What kind of strategies are we going to try, and then check in a few weeks and see how things are going, and that kind of thing. So even when the kid themselves isn't totally receptive, sometimes even just meeting a kid and letting them know, what, your parents pretty worried about what's happening right now, can jog a kiddo into thinking like, ooh, like maybe this is a bit more serious than I realized, and maybe I'll make a bit more of an effort than I had, or listen a little bit more to what my parent is saying. So the easiest probably way for parents to contact us is through the guidance department at your school. Figure out who your guidance counselor is, let them know that you'd like to speak with us, and we're more than happy to provide support. And then try and meet with your kiddo if they're open to meeting with us, or provide support for you if your kiddo is not interested.
You can also follow us on Twitter
Oh yeah, look at that.
because we're hip with the social media.
We're so hip. And then I think one of our last points, Jamie's going to flip the slide for me. There we are. So we know that we're all spending more time in front of screens right now, and it can't be helped, but we can make it be work a little bit better for our families if we're struggling with it right now. So we want to really focus on the meaningful engagement time without screens. So it doesn't matter how much time you have where everybody's away from screens. What matters is that you're taking that time and you're making it really meaningful. You're spending time, you're asking about their days, you're asking about what's going well, you're asking about what's not going so well. You're really, it's very much quality over quantity. So if you don't have, if, for yourself, you're working from home and your workload has increased dramatically and now you're managing homeschool and you're doing all these different things, we get that like time seems to be at a premium these days, but making the time that you do have count is so much more important than trying to make oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles of time. Expect changes. It's where we're in at times that we've never lived before, and changes are normal, and that's okay. Really, we really wanted the like main takeaway message from this was to work on that connection with your kids, and it really does matter. And like Jamie had mentioned, we've been watching a bunch of presentations and stuff, and all the experts come back to this idea that one of the most important things we can do for our kids to keep them safe from any online dangers and from falling into too much problematic screen use is connection. We're important to them even when they say we're not. We matter to them even when they act like we aren't, or that we don't. Parents are important for sure. So, and then trying to maintain as much predictability and routine as possible, and knowing that that's tricky in these times right now, but setting some things like, hey, we all sit down to eat supper without screens, and sticking to it is something that your kiddo can predict happens every day at some point in time, right? Yeah, anything to add, Jamie, to that? Okay. And then sorry, go ahead.
No, I think you covered it really well. It's really about kind of developing structure and connecting with your kid.
And so we've provided here for you just a whole bunch of links of different resources that we use to build this, but things that we also find have been interesting and useful for us. And that very bottom link is the one that we were talking about. So Jamie has gotten herself into the school board jargon, but the ABA, so the Applied Behavior Analysis team, really put together a great video with some very hands-on practical things about how to help with screen time transitions and creating limits and stuff like that. So if you want to check it out, the link is there for you to click on. Thank you so much for the time that you guys spent with us today, and don't ever feel free to reach out to your school to connect with us at any point in time.